All right, all right. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Dontell. He's a citizen journalist. You may know him on Twitter as Unapologetic. Welcome back, Dontell. It's been a minute.
I'm glad to be back, Sabby. Ready
to
do it.
Yeah, no, it's been a hot minute, but you've been doing your thing. I really do appreciate a lot of your work on Substack, and that's what we're going to get into tonight. In particular, this article, guys, make sure you're following Dontell on Substack. Corporations fight Congress to keep their UFO research secret. Defense contractors and their lobbyists aren't happy with aggressive UFO disclosure laws being pushed by Congress. Now they are working behind closed doors to keep their secrets from coming out. So, Dontell, I know you're really big into the UFO stuff and classified documents and all that jazz. I personally don't think that the government should keep classified documents. I think all that information should be open to the public. With this particular story about the corporations, let's get into this a little bit, because I want to know what they are trying to hide from us and why.
Right. That's a great question. So if anybody's done research into the UFO topic, you've noticed that there's a lot of overlap between the government and private contractors. And it's the way that they've set up this scheme basically in the government for a long time. And part of it is it allows a whole other layer of secrecy to the topic. So say all of this was just being held within the executive branch of the Department of Defense, the CIA, whatever, then there's a higher chance of somebody with higher authority just coming in and saying, hey, let me see what you have, or whatever it is. And also the way that the government does research, a lot of times they fund private corporations to do research and development for different projects. And with this, it also, like I said, it provides another layer of secrecy, because say they do have these UFO documents and they do have these crashed UFOs. It's much harder for government officials like Congress, like how they're doing these investigations now, and the Inspector General's office, they're doing these investigations now. It's much harder for them to get access to documents that are hidden in private corporations. They have a whole other legal structure that they follow, and they have their own security clearances and protocols that they follow that are completely separate from what the government have. So you might have top secret clearance and have access to different documents in the government, but if you're not cleared by a corporation, you don't get to see what they have. And if you're a private citizen and you want to know what they have, you can't really FOIA. You can't FOIA Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Raytheon or any of these other defense contractors who are accused of having these crashed UFOs and the documents in the research.
I was so glad when you sent me this article of yours, because this is another example to everyone out there watching that shows you how the corporations control the government. This is just another example, whether you believe in UFOs or not. It just goes to show you who's really running the show. I want to get to this point here. Is ATI paying lobbyists to go after UFO disclosure laws? It says right here, last year, ATI hired several lobbyists from Covington, and one in particular stands out in the context of this story. According to the financial disclosures on the Senate website, Stephanie Barna was hired to lobby for ATI's interests, specifically on the NDAA and other transactions, OT. Let's get into this a little bit here, Dontell, about the ATI.
Right. So let me first start with how I even found this newsletter, because that's what this article is mostly about. There was a newsletter posted in one of the top corporate law firms in the country and really in the world. And it was the title of it was The Implications of the UFO Disclosure Act that's in the NDAA. And so I read the newsletter, and we could get into the details of the newsletter. But I started to look into, all right, so this is from a lobbyist and a lawyer. She is a lawyer too, working at this law firm. So I wanted to see who would be paying for this work, because it's not like a lobbyist is going to just come out and um, like make like have their everything that they do is for their clients that's paying them. So somebody had to be paying for this specific work when it comes to the UFO Disclosure Act that was in the NDAA. So I looked through, I try to find their clients, and it's a lot harder to find the clients for the law firm because it's protected. But thankfully, because of campaign finance laws, I was able to find who was paying them for their lobbyist service. And of course, it was some of the biggest names in the defense industry, like Bay Systems and Northrop Grumman, and I believe Boeing. And then I found this seemingly like vague company that I had never heard of before. And the name of the company was Advanced Technology International. And they paid Covington over $1 million over the last couple of years for their lobbyist services. And they specifically also paid this lobbyist who wrote this newsletter. They hired her specifically. She's they're one of her clients. And so I looked into the company, and it's what's known as a consortium manager. And there's a whole there's a whole category of projects that are funded by the Defense Department that are called other transactions. And these are basically all top secret research projects, different technologies. I listed one of the projects that they help put together. Like I said, the ATI is the consortium manager, and the consortium is made up of all these different defense contractors, academic institutions, and people and different agencies and departments in the national security apparatus. That's who makes up these consortiums. And ATI, as the consortium manager, is in charge of putting these projects together and facilitating the money that's awarded, these other transactions. And if you go through their website, they facilitated billions of dollars in research, from to large defense contractors to smaller ones. One of the projects that they have on their website that they brag about is they made this directed energy weapon laser that can shoot down drones and stuff like that. So all these top secret projects that most people probably would have never heard of, they help facilitate these research projects. And so that's what ATI does. And they hired Stephanie Barna, who was she used to be a top lawyer in the Army. She worked in the Army's prosecutor's office. She was part of the team that investigated the WikiLeaks leaked the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs originally. She later moved into the general counsel's office for the Army. And then her last job in government, she was the general counsel for the Senate Armed Services Committee. And that's very important and relevant because as general counsel for the Senate Armed Services Committee, it was her job to finalize the text and language in the NDAA, which is the funding for the Department of Defense. So ATI hired, and to give a little background on this law that they're talking about, last year, Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds and some other senators, they introduced this UFO Disclosure Act. And it was a 64-page bill to basically force the government, all the different agencies in the government, as well as private contractors, anybody in academia who has access to UFO documents, research files, actual craft. They literally specify that in the legislation, craft that came from from unknown origins, and they specify or made by non-human intelligence. The bill also require them to hand over any bodies of the non-human intelligences that they have in their possession. So it was a very detailed and it was a very specific bill. And it also went over the purpose of why they even needed to create the law in the first place, which was that in the way they describe it, and it's been described in other documents going back decades, there's what's called a legacy program where, like I mentioned before, academia, some like a small group in the intelligence community, people in the Department of Defense, like a small group of them, and also private contractors, they are basically running these secret UFO programs, and they're keeping them illegally, keeping them from Congress, keeping them from the president, and basically stealing money to fund the program and doing all types of criminality to keep it running.
Well,
So,
I remember when that legislation was brought to the floor. I remember a lot of people were happy about that on both sides, that they're like, yeah, we need to have this information. But then I feel like it just kind of went away. Like we didn't hear about it as much anymore after that, it seemed like.
right. And it did pass the Senate the way it was, and all 64 pages, and then it went to the House, and that's when I believe the lobbyists got a hold of it, and they took out a lot of the key parts of the bill, because there was supposed to set up like a disclosure panel that was supposed to review all the documents and publish them, declassify all of them, and they were supposed to have subpoena power. They were able to go to a court and get subpoenas for documents and testimony and things like that. So it was when it went to the House, and the irony is the representative in the House that was leading the charge to gut the bill was Mike Turner, who's the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he represents the district where Wright-Patterson Air Base is, which is another important base when it comes to UFO research. They've been said to have bodies and craft and materials and doing research and things like that for a very long time, for decades. So it's ironic that that's the congressman who led the charge in removing all those important pieces from the legislation. Now to ATI, so they paid Stephanie Barna and these other lobbyists to lobby on their behalf on the NDAA. And so basically her whole role there at Covington and Burling is to lobby for defense contractors on the NDAA and other government contracts for weapons and equipment and things like that. So, and you can look through, as I did, all the other work that she's published on the law firm's like newsletter. They're all related to the NDAA. So clearly, this is what she's getting paid for. Those are the topics that her clients are paying her for. So it was the amount of coincidences for this company, ATI, that facilitates billions of dollars in top secret government research, that they have connections to literally every single defense contractor you could think of. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, all of them. And they paid Stephanie Barna, who used to write the NDA, and now she's putting out this newsletter talking about the UFO disclosure law that's in the NDAA. So it's way too many coincidences for there to be nothing there. And then you get into the specifics of what was in the newsletter. Clearly, she's advocating on behalf of her clients who have this material and who have these documents, and they don't want it to come out to the public.
Mm-hmm. This is very important, because I think that another thing that you mentioned too about how the lobbyists were able to remove certain items from legislation. This is another thing. This is why I continue to tell people that our representatives, they don't represent us. They're supposed to, but they actually work for the lobbyists. They work for corporations. They answer to those people. And honestly, if we had a real democracy, lobbyists should not be able to touch any piece of legislation or recommend that anything is removed from any piece of legislation. They should not be involved in this process at all, but they are. And I wanted you guys to hear about this so that you understand how sometimes, even if a piece of legislation passes, certain things may be removed from it, not because politicians did it willingly or wanted to do it first, but because lobbyists told them to do it. So this is very important for people to understand. That's very suspect, Dontell.
Yeah, and so for me, like, one of the reasons why this is such was an important topic for me to write about this specific newsletter is, one, it's kind of admitting that from the lobbyists of these defense contractors, and you know how people like to say, oh, it's all a psyop and it's a distraction, everything like that. They had absolutely no, this clearly wasn't like meant to deceive the public. This was buried in their corporate newsletter. And really the only people who would see it are their clients and people in the defense industry who were to read their newsletter, because they have a bunch of other updates about deadlines for reporting and new policies and new legislation that affect defense contractors and things like that. So it's literally meant for people in the industry. And with the way it reads, is incredibly candid. So they're admitting that some of these defense contractors, not only they have these materials that they don't want to make public, they're coming up with strategy behind the scenes to impact policy to keep it that way. And so for me, that's a big part of it. But also, I want people in this space to understand that there is there clearly, and I've done a lot of research over the last year, and I've produced many documents, declassified documents from decades ago, going back to the 40s, that prove that the government is not only researching this topic, and they have incredible amounts of stuff that they haven't made public, but also so many people are so in this space, they're so convinced that there's nothing to see here, that they're going to allow all of this to take place basically behind closed doors with absolutely no input from the public. And I don't think that's right. I do think we should have a say in how this happens, how disclosure happens. Because at this point, it's literally like the best way you can interpret the situation. There's factions of the government who want some disclosure, but they don't want to tell people everything. You have the defense contractors who don't want to tell people anything. And then there's also another faction in the government who don't want to tell people anything, people involved in this program. So and then the politicians in between. So basically, if you're so convinced there's nothing to this that you don't even want to look into it, you don't want to share any of these developments with your audience, you are quite literally saying, if this is all true, and I believe it is, because just the amount of evidence is overwhelming at this point. If you believe that this is true, and there is a non-human intelligence interacting with the planet, and these UFOs are here, and the government has possession of them, you're basically saying it's up to them, all of these corrupt people who have their own interests and their own motivations, to decide what the public knows, and just like how much they know. If they're going to tell people 10%, 20%, 30%, you're allowing them to make all these decisions in secret with absolutely no input. So that's why I think this story was so important.
That's true, because my big thing is, and I know you feel this way too, again, I don't think that there should be classified documents. I think that the American people have a right to know what our government is doing, what they're researching. I mean, this also goes back to, the JFK, his death as well. Remember, there was a lot of conversation around this a couple of months ago, actually more so last year, where they were saying, okay, we're going to declassify these documents. I'm like, I don't think there should be classified information. I don't think this information should be kept from the American people. If they feel there's something out there that they are researching, or something that is important, obviously they think it's important if they're doing the research on it, then we should have a right to know about it. And that's the part that it drives me crazy, because I always wonder, like, what else is there? And I know some people just think like, oh, well, who cares about unidentified flying objects? It's not a big thing, not a big deal, or it's not real or whatever. We don't know. We don't really know if it's real or not. Like, and even if it is, like, the point is they're doing the research and they're not telling us about it. And then you have the lobbyists and the corporations that have the control over the politicians, and they're telling them, even though that legislation passed, they're still telling them what they can tell us and what they can't tell us.
Right. And like in the newsletter that Stephanie Barner wrote, they specifically mentioned parts of the legislation that their clients are objecting to, which was like, it would give the government eminent domain over all UFO materials, the craft, the bodies, the research, all of that stuff. And so, in the way that the law was written, all of the documents, that basically everything that is older than 2000, older than the year 2000. So, like, if it was produced in 1940 all the way to 1999, it's automatically declassified. And the only exception would be is if the president personally went, and there was, like I said, there's supposed to be a panel set up. They brought this specific document, like they can't just do a blanket national security exception. They have to cite this specific document and the specific reason why they don't want it to be released for whatever national security excuse they come up with. And I personally don't agree with that exceptions and all that bullshit anyway, but that's the way that the law was written, that the president could make an appeal to keep a specific document classified for another 7 years or something like that. And one of the points of contention that Stephanie Barna brought up was that defense contractors, they wouldn't have the ability to redact certain things or to keep certain things secret. And so she was advocating that if you are in that category of people who have this material, you should approach whoever you're working with in government on this research and have them put in exceptions so that you can make your own redactions. And so you could make your own, like, keep certain documents from being made public. So, like you said, they abuse the classification system, which is like, and you talk about, so why is the UFO topic important? There's so many different reasons why it's important, but it gets to the heart of the whole national security state. There are unelected people who are, like you said, abuse the classification system, and anything that exposes crimes of the government, anything that embarrasses them, if you show how they've been, like on this topic specifically, show that they've been lying and they've been active disinformation campaigns and active psyops to mislead the public on this topic, and all that comes out, it makes them look bad. So they hide it all behind redactions and security classifications and things like that. And that's fundamentally not how a democracy is supposed to work. The people are supposed to have access to the information so that we can make our own decisions and decide how the government is supposed to run on any given issue. But on this issue and any other issue, they use these blanket national security justifications to keep all this stuff away from the public. And this is one of the most egregious topics I would say they do it on. And also, like, just in general, how this topic relates to people. So if this technology exists, and like I said, there's plenty of documents and evidence that says it does, then that means somewhere there's some technology using free, clean, renewable energy, and they've been doing it for a very long time. And apparently the government has access to this technology. So again, if this exists, and one of the reasons why they'd want to keep it secret is because it would disrupt the energy industry if it does come out that they have this free and renewable energy source. So they use it, like I said, they use the classification system to protect the power structures as it is. So it's just fundamentally, like I said, against what democracy is supposed to be. And I do think if that this, and for any number of other reasons, this should be declassified. The people should be able to decide what they want to do with this information. And I strongly am against this cover up and this attempt to move away from the cover up by the very same people who've been initiating it and carrying out for the last 80 years. I don't think that they should decide whatever technology, and part of the why these corporations want to keep this secret is to protect their profits and their patent rights. So like I said, I don't agree with that at all.
Plus, if people found out about that, then that would hurt corporations big time, right? Like that could hurt if people knew that existed. Like that would, like you said, it would not be profitable. And the corporations, they're looking out for their own pockets and how they can make more money. And God forbid if that were to get out and people find out, oh my God, it looks like there may be clean, renewable energy, then what the hell are we paying for it for?
Exactly. It would affect like eliminate poverty around the world. It would, you're concerned about climate change and pollution and global warming and things like that. I don't see a better a solution. The problems keep getting worse. So it's so funny to me that, because one of the reasons why I started doing my show in general was I was learning so much about how the world actually works and the corruption and how corporate profits basically drives everything. And so I felt like the more people who know this information, the better chance there is that something will change. And then you have this one issue, this one topic where not only, and again, something that I didn't mention before, but so if we do have access to free renewable energy, so a lot of these wars about oil and stealing natural resources, it becomes unnecessary. So you have this issue that gets to can address the issue of poverty and pollution and the war machine. And it's like so many people are just so stubborn and unwilling to even look into it. It just blows my mind, because even like you said, say it's not true. I mean, say it is true. Why is it? Why would you be so against even looking into the topic? Even if there's a small chance that it is true, and all of the giant implications that come along with it, I think it's worth looking into. And I've never gone out and said, you know what, everybody, you have to believe me, these UFOs are real. But my main push has been over the last month, and challenge to new media has been, what would it take for you to even just do some research into it, to cover the topic? I'm not saying you have to believe it.
Right.
But what would it take for you to say, you know what, maybe there's something to look into. Maybe we should do some more research. Maybe whatever it is that they're trying to keep secret, we should try to uncover it so that the public knows. And I just think that's a huge missed opportunity in this space.
I 100% agree with what you're saying there. And I want to finish it up with this. And I think there's one question for you, Dontell, but this part right here: lobbyists and politicians are making decisions for the public. And this is what it really hits home. This is what I like about your work on Substack, Dontell, because I feel like you always tie it all together at the end of the article, what people really need to be focusing on. So again, whether you believe in UFOs or not is beside the point. The point that Dontell's trying to make in this article is, he says, earlier I mentioned the raging debate about whether or not UFOs are real going on among the general public. While that's happening, the military-industrial complex and their lobbyists are throwing their weight around to manipulate the most important development in human history in a way that best serves their corporate interests. prioritizing corporate profits, covering up possible crimes committed, or anything in between. The objectives of the war machine have never been aligned with those of the public. So this is the point to hit home, folks. Lobbyists and politicians are making decisions for the public. And that's what I think everybody needs to take from this. And that's not okay. Like, we have no say so. And I was thinking about what you said about the clean, renewable energy that's free. You know, that would change things. That would change the U.S. relationship in the Middle East. Think about that. Think about how that could change our relationship with Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Yeah, it would literally be the biggest story of in human history when this comes out. So all I ask is, and anybody who's in your audience, anybody watching this, just do the basic research. Just try to find. There's so many different areas that you can dig into, because, like I said, I think that this is something that the public should decide. I think we all should get access to all the information. And I don't see how you can really disagree with that, because clearly they're keeping something secret. Clearly they're covering something up. And they're not hiring lobbyists to change these UFO disclosure laws for no reason. They're not going to one of the most expensive corporate law firms just to have them change or gut a UFO disclosure law if they don't have these materials. So I get that this is a very hard topic to wrap your mind around. And trust me, before I even started writing about it, before I even did a video about it on my channel, it took me weeks and months of just going like internally with myself. Is this bullshit? Is there something there? And honestly, you just have to put out the biases that you already have and just follow the evidence. And like I said, there's plenty of evidence. Whistleblower testimony from decades ago, declassified documents. I talked about the Kona Blue proposal from the Department of Homeland Security, which was a 56-page proposal for a program where the entire purpose of it was to do an inventory of all the crashed UFOs in the government possession and in possession of defense contractors. This is from 2011. So and it was incredibly detailed. There's so much to look into. And so it's so funny to me when people say there's no evidence. There's plenty of evidence. You might want to see the inside of a UFO. I want to see that too. But that shouldn't be the only thing that counts as evidence. Because in any other scenario, if you had as many documents as I found, that counts as evidence. If you had as many people telling a consistent story for 80 years, that counts as evidence. And one more thing, I want to just end on this. It is the double standard that some people have when it comes to accepting some stories that come from sources in the national security state as opposed to others. Because one of the main pushbacks on this is that it's coming from sources in the national security state. And I agree that you should be skeptical and you should look for confirmation other than what people say. But look at like how people treated the article from Seymour Hersh when he wrote about the Nord Stream pipeline explosion. I agree with his assessment, and I think that's the best, most accurate version of events. But nobody was saying, I'm not going to believe this article. Seymour Hersh, where's the documents? Because that entire article was based on an anonymous source in the intelligence community. But everybody cited it, and nobody had an issue with it because it logically made sense. The available evidence that we have from the public statements from government officials saying they wanted to take out the Nord Stream pipeline and celebrating it, and everything, the fact that it was an almost impossible operation for anybody to do outside of the CIA, all of those other context clues and evidence, people were able to put together and conclude that even though this story came from an anonymous source in the intelligence community, there's supporting evidence there to make it a valid story. So I just want people to remove their bias on this and follow the evidence. Don't just take my word for it. Follow the evidence. That's all I want to say on that.
All right. And there's one question here for you, Dontell, from a kid. Thank you for this, a kid. Hi, Sabby. Salute for having Dontell on the show. We missed you, kid. Ask him about Bob Lazar. Are you familiar with Bob Lazar, Dontell?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Bob Lazar's story. And so definitely everything that's happened over the last couple years has made like added validity to his story. There have been other people, like even at the time when he said he was working at Area 51, and then his whole story about how he thought they were going to force him out of the program and kill him or whatever. So he brought people out to where they were doing these UFO testing. So he had multiple people out there, actually, because they had these schedules or whatever when they would do flight tests and things like that when there was a lower chance of people seeing them in the public, like on like a Wednesday night when traffic was low or something like that. So he brought people out, and he had witnesses out there looking at UFOs right when he said that they would. So, and there's other documents like his W-2 from that said he worked at Area 51, and just other things in his story that have, and the funny thing about it, so he's somebody who's had a sketchy past, but it's important to follow the details of what he's telling and try to confirm it in other ways, and that's what I've done. And I can't say 100% that Bob Lazar is telling the truth, but this will be such an incredible lie with so much small details to support what he's saying that it like I said, at some point with the same thing with this topic in general, at some point you just have to believe your lying eyes. And even though it's an incredible story, there's not that much to disprove it. So that's my take on Bob Lazar. And there's some people trying to have him come and testify to Congress and tell his story, and I agree with that. I definitely think he should do that, and they should definitely investigate his story as well as any of the other witnesses who, at this point, there's over 40 witnesses who've gone to the Inspector General and said that they've been involved in this program and they've directly worked on these craft. So all of their story should be investigated, and I don't think it should be investigated in secret as they've done so far. I think it should be all public. All the evidence that they brought and the documents, photographs, videos, I don't think any of it should be classified and done in secret as they've been doing. I think it should all be public.
All right, Dontell, thank you so much. Before you go, where can people find you and follow your work?
You can follow me on Substack. The link to that is in my Twitter. On Twitter, you could find me at unapologetic.yt for my YouTube channel, because that's why I made it. You can find me on YouTube at Unapologetic. And yeah, I'm going to be doing more work on this topic and other topics. So thank you so much for having me on, Sabby. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dontell. Take care.
You too.
Bye.